All right, welcome one and all to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. As always, with me is Phil McKenzie.
Hello.
And, you're just saying low now, aren't you?
No, that time I actually said hello. Last time I said
Oh,
hello.
this time sounded more like deliberate than last time.
Keeping you on your toes.
Yeah. So I always feel very nervous starting the show. Welcome, dear listeners. We had a nice little weekend off there. I had a little stay with my family and enjoyed the interim, which was nice. A little break from thinking about the UFC, but there's no rest for the wicked, at least not for long. And on that note, we do have another UFC Fight Night card coming up this weekend. What I will say is I think it's a perfectly solid fight night. For now. Mm-hmm. God knows what's going to happen to it. It's already, like all these cards the last 5 weeks, I was saying to you, Phil, before we started, it's like they're, frankly, I almost want to be complimentary of the UFC matchmakers for keeping them together, because these cards seem determined to pull themselves apart at the seams. Whether it's the relentless schedule, it's the traveling associated with a couple of them, it's, I don't know, weight cutting issues, which we've talked about that sort of catching up to the sport of MMA, perhaps, as weight cutting just gets more and more extreme. Whatever the cause, we have just had a lot of cards get, like, scattershot, hit by injuries, and miraculously scraped back together with short notice replacement fights, some of which have not panned out, some of which have not been very good or taught us very much, but honestly quite a few of which have just been, like, I think the best possible replacement fight you could do to, if you're the UFC and your interest is this card has to happen no matter what. And this card is another one of those. The main event, Rose Namajunas, was supposed to be her versus Maycee Barber. Good, meaningful, difficult fight for Rose at 125. Maycee Barber had to withdraw. Apparently she's got ongoing health issues. I didn't see anything more about it than that, but hopefully she's all right. But she's been replaced by Tracy Cortez. So instead of Rose versus an established contender, it's Rose versus a really good prospect who seems ready to establish herself as a contender. Perfectly good replacement fight, in my opinion. Elsewhere on the card, we were supposed to have Drew Dober versus Mike Davis. Sounds like a great mid-card action fight. Mike Davis had to withdraw. Jean Silva, who just got a knockout a couple weeks ago, he stepped in on 2 weeks' notice. So now we got a perfectly good mid-card action fight as a replacement. Things like that are all over this card, just as they've been all over all these cards, it seems, recently. And somehow I think they have succeeded in putting, at least for now, a pretty good-looking fight night event on paper.
Yeah, I think you look up and down it and you're like, yeah, pretty much all of these will be good fun.
Yeah.
You know most of the people who are on it, and know most of them for good reasons. And it has only one middleweight fight. That's the heavy. 2 middleweight fights, and they're the heaviest. They're the heaviest guys on the card.
That's why I feel so optimistic about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all little dudes and little gals.
And one of the middleweight fights is Abdul Razak Al Hassan versus Cody Brundage, so at least it'll be silly
and probably short.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The best kind of big person fight.
That's right. So yeah, just to put a point on it before we dive into that main event, we are going to talk about Namajunas-Cortez. We might change our minds as we go through this episode, but the other one that I at least really want to talk about is Christian Rodriguez, Julian Erosa, because I love Christian Rodriguez, love my young vets. We also have further down in this card, blue chip flyweight prospect, men's flyweight prospect, Joshua Van, has a tough test versus Charles Johnson. I think that's a very good piece of matchmaking. And yeah, Dober-Silva, got a couple other solid fights just scattered across this card. So let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about the main event, Rose Namajunas, Tracy Cortez. I characterized this before, Phil, as very much a crossroads fight. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of how this fight has been booked and set up, and the paths available to both fighters, this to me feels very much like Robert Whittaker and Ikram Aliskerov, because this is someone who is a clear, strong prospect in the division. Has a tremendous base, skills in multiple areas, but who is then being, quickly thrown up 3 tiers of competition against one of the best fighters to ever do it at flyweight and strawweight. But
yeah.
So yeah, it feels very much like that. So this is a chance for Tracy Cortez to either skyrocket into contention incredibly quickly, or it's a chance for just a deflating loss, because this kind of stuff is really hard and the people at the top of the divisions are very, very good.
Sure. Yeah, but I think as a crossroads fight, I mean, the other side of it too is we have a lot of doubts about Rose Namajunas. Based on her last 2 fights and a couple of ones before this move to flyweight. And so yeah, that's always the other side of the crossroads fight. I think it's...
I mean, we had doubts about Bobby Knuckles as well, right?
Of course. It's
only in retrospect that
yes.
The Aliskerov fight is viewed as this, utter slam dunk. At the time, we were like, this is an incredibly dangerous trap for him.
We thought it was super dangerous, yeah. I think the difference, though, is, or the similarity is that I don't think a loss would really massively hurt Tracy Cortez. I mean, she is 30. She probably needs to hit her stride pretty damn soon. But you lose to Rose Namajunas, especially if you put on a good performance. You're still developing. You just had the best performance of your career in your last fight. For Rose, as with the Whittaker-Aliskerov fight, it feels like a loss would be probably much more damning and probably just kill her title hopes. I mean, I don't know. The UFC needs their stars. They stick around forever now. Anybody with any name recognition, but based on how she's been looking at women's flyweight, they've not been very impressive performances. I would say less impressive for what they are than what Bobby Knuckles has been doing at middleweight. Because you put Bobby Knuckles against any guy who's not a middleweight champion, and he might have some troubles, but he's pretty convincingly beating them. Meanwhile, for Rose, she had I mean,
it's not necessarily the case, right? Because he absolutely scraped by Darren Till, who sucks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So what was that? That was Rose's fight with Amanda Hebush, which was her most recent fight, where it was like, you really should win this. But
the Till fight was much less convincing. I mean, it's just that both of these fighters can have inconsistencies.
Yeah.
With Whittaker, it's simply his durability is the way that he's getting buzzed in every single fight. And with Namajunas, it's that she's a complete head case.
Yeah. And we thought there was some head case stuff going on with Bobby too. But
yeah. But
we know Rose is a lifelong head case. Yeah.
I mean, I think of Rose's 2 fights that she's had at flyweight, I think they are an interesting mixture, because I thought the Fioro, as we kind of said at the time, the Fioro fight was just a very gritty, tough performance, especially considering that, her hand was jacked throughout pretty much the entire fight.
Yeah, she bent her damn pinky the wrong direction in the first minute of the fight.
Yep. She pushed through really well.
Looked like a cocktail shrimp.
Yeah.
It did.
But yeah. Yeah, it did. And that's a very apt image. Thanks.
I'm a writer.
But yeah, she pushed through it. Looked like she really wanted it. Kept a pace. And yeah, in a fight that you would have very much expected her to sort of fall out of. She didn't.
Yes.
But then again, the Hebush fight. Now you're starting to worry that the main issue is that the physical gifts that sort of carried her to a belt don't seem to be translating. That's 2 fights she's had, and the second one is against someone who's been a strawweight for much of their career.
Yeah.
And you're just like, well, she didn't look fast, and she didn't look powerful.
She didn't look consistent. I mean, there were a couple times when she did look... This is why I can't help but think a lot of it is a confidence thing. Because I didn't think she looked slow. She didn't look physically restricted. She looked like she had a throttle on for most of the fight.
Yeah.
It was just making moves that were slightly too big against Amanda Hebush, trying to move a little too much. But when she found moments where you could tell she just knew her distance and her timing was right, she was able to crack Hebush with really good shots. And otherwise, stayed very mobile, dealt with a lot of pressure, but just didn't look... She did not look like she, in either of these 2 fights, she just has not looked like she's had the sort of decisive fight-changing factor that she always had at strawweight. Or if you want to... Again, this is the thing with Rose. What do you attribute this to? It's like trying to figure out what are the ingredients of what we've been seeing. How much of it is the fact that we now know she is just straight up not working with Trevor Whitman and hasn't been for these last 2 fights? How much of it is it's post several championship runs and she's old? She's just no longer the young woman she was. How much of it is the fact that it's flyweight and perhaps she's like a Conor McGregor kind of figure who's just not as a devastating a physical force if you add 10 pounds to her and her opponents? Or is it all 3 of these things? And how much of it is her just being a career-long head case?
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that it's some combination of all 3 of them.
Yeah.
That being said, do I think she's going to lose to Tracy Cortez? I would struggle to see it. I do like Tracy Cortez from what I've seen of her. You first recommended the Jesuit Vicious fight, I think, to me after you'd seen it, because you said, these 2... it's one of those rare chances you get to watch 2 good prospects being matched early on in their UFC careers. They both really went for it. It's just a tough, gritty fight, and it's also Cortez's coming out party as someone who's come with a wrestling background who's now showing that they can be a really aggressive and fairly potent striker.
Yeah, suddenly she had hands.
Yep. And yeah, there's a lot to like about Cortez. She sort of stays on top of her feet. She's got a good stance to throw from. And yeah, it means she can throw in combination with some power, which is not actually that common at the women's weight classes.
No.
Which meant that she was able to sort of drive Jesuit Vicious out of the fight a bit over time, even though it was fairly competitive. One thing she didn't have, which is obviously the last thing to arrive really, is much defense. And
yeah, she had footwork. She was maintaining her distance and paying attention to her angles, but in the pocket, it's pretty much it was like a lot of young fighters who first figure out their striking. It was all about her orchestrating the collisions rather than really like comfortably navigating long stretches in the pocket.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of fighters who basically work on maintaining posture, even at the cost of like losing, at the cost of like never having any head movement.
Sure.
And she's to some extent on that spectrum where she's mostly just kind of watching punches coming at her and bracing for them.
Like Kamaru
which
Usman.
means that like, yeah. Which means that on the for one, Rose Namajunas is going to jab her up.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's she's going to be super vulnerable to getting head kicked because that worked every single time Chasuda Viscius went for it.
That is a very good shout.
That is, as we've said, Rose became like a big puncher, but when she first came to the UFC, that was her thing. Was basically just like head kicks and power subs. It was just all an athlete's game. So yeah, it is one of those fights where I'm like, and again, this is why I come back to the Aliskerov Whittaker fight. I'm like, concerning from a trajectory standpoint, from a style matchup standpoint, I think Rose is simply just all wrong for Cortez. She needs to force her way into the clinch more to tire Rose out and sort of make her discouraged.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she's going to do that. She's not actually like a big flyweight. She's not like tall or, she's certainly not like Manon Fiorot, who's fucking gigantic for the weight class.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think, so you're basically asking a sort of shorter, more powerful fighter to just overwhelm Rose Namajunas. And, again, totally possible that that she could do that.
Yeah.
Jessica Andrade sort of did. But also, does she have... One of the things is that, Andrade also had a fairly solid diet of low kicks to disrupt Namajunas' jab and sort of pull her into 50-50 exchanges, because otherwise Rose's leg was going to get chewed up. Does Cortez have that? I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do really feel like this is an Aliskerov Whittaker situation where super impressive fighter, skilled in multiple areas, fighting someone who is both much more experienced at a much higher level, and sort of essentially just like a really bad style matchup.
Yeah, the more I hear you talk about it, the more I appreciate that comparison. And I think really maybe one way to say it is that, like Whittaker Aliskerov, this is a fight where if Rose shows up and she's on, she should be able to look really impressive here. Right?
Yeah, and honestly, I think that is one of the weird stories that's come out of the modern rebooking era UFC.
Mm-hmm.
Is that booking one-sided fights actually doesn't hurt fighters at all. Boxing obviously knew this.
Right.
Has known this for a long time, but boxing obviously pushes it too far because of the incentives between fighters and managers and all that other kind of stuff to actually have tons of fairly meaningless keep busy fights. But now that the UFC has been sprinkling in more not entirely intended sometimes not entirely intended sort of mismatches, it's actually working pretty well.
Replacement level fights for established contenders.
Yeah. So Pereira Prochaska, right? Kind of knew that Pereira was the better fighter after their first fight, and basically what he's done since. But
he looks electric.
Stunning victory, suddenly catapults him into the transfer, and he's the biggest active star in the UFC now. Similarly, like Sean O'Malley against Chito Vera.
Right.
Chito Vera didn't deserve the title shot, but Sean O'Malley thrashed him, and people were like, man. And similarly, yeah, Aliskerov, he's now suddenly people are like, oh yeah, Bobby Knuckles, he's back, man. Yeah. So it's an sometimes unintended consequence of these fights is that, like, yeah, it can really revitalize or in just plain old vitalize people's careers.
Yeah. I do have this feeling. I think Tracy Cortez, again, she has a lot of as yet unrealized potential. The reason I pointed that fight out to you when it happened, her fight with Jasmine Jasudavicius, was that it was a stark contrast from her earlier fights, where again for a long time she has been a very obvious prospect, good athlete, strong wrestling background, fast, gritty, well-rounded and pretty flexible. She's taken sort of different approaches to a lot of different opponents. But I would also say overall, I think she's had stronger results for her division than Aliskerov did for his.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah.
They were super decisive wins, but as we pointed out at the time, there's not a lot you can say about a dude solely based on him knocking out Worley Alves and guy with worst chin in the world. Why am I forgetting his name? Phil Halls.
Phil Halls. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's, if you're going to look impressive by knocking somebody out immediately, those are two pretty solid candidates. Meanwhile, I think Cortez...
You could barely do better.
Exactly, yeah. Cortez has a really solid string of respectable wins going back years now. I mean, going back to her Invicta career, she fought Erin Blanchfield when she was 4-1 and Blanchfield was 3-0. She fought Maria Agapova on the Contender Series when she was 5-1 and Agapova was 6-0. She fought Vanessa Mello when she was 10-6 and Tracy was 6-1. Justine Kish, Melissa Gatto, they're all like, appropriate for her level of experience, but very solid, respectable wins. There's not really one on there that stands out as like well, of course she looked good. And Jasudavicius is in many ways her toughest, most like psychologically testing opponent yet. It's sort of like if you didn't know how Rose Namajunas would handle the pressure of somebody like Manon Fiorot. Or I suppose Hebush was more of a pressure performance. You didn't know how she would handle that. And then she goes in there and just very, very clearly wins. Uh-huh. Cortez went in there against Jasudavicius, and I was saying about her, I think she's a little timid, like the Kamaru Usman comparison again. She's a bit of an overthinker, I think. She's just clearly not super comfortable on the feet yet. And you will see her, I think she was marked by a lot of erratic decision making. Again, another hallmark of an inexperienced fighter, where she would just sort of lose sight of what the goal of the fight was from moment to moment. Lose sight of, who was ahead and what she's supposed to be doing and, how hard she's supposed to be pushing at this moment to make sure she picks up this round or whatever. Again, these are things that veterans, this is a sense that you just develop that she didn't have. And then suddenly against Jasudavicius, she is throwing sharp combinations with really quick hands. She is landing with power, and she is like dictating the pace and intensity of the fight really actively. She was just on top of that fight the entire time. That really, really impressed me. That was a serious, okay, she took a year off, she developed her skills, and she suddenly looks like she could be a contender. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a more, it's a more impressive and convincing rise than Aliskerov's. And I think Rose, while we talked about Bobby not having that killer instinct anymore, I kind of worry about that even more so with Rose. Mm-hmm. because it has been a very long string. I think even if you trace this back to her rematch with like Weili Zhang,
Yep,
a string of sort of let's do just enough kind of performances from Rose.
yep.
Of course, that heinous Carla Esparza rematch. And then, yeah, showing the grit against Fiorot, but just not... I don't know. What if Rose is just in a division where, like, people are just... Like, you say Tracy Cortez is not a big flyweight, you're right. She's the same height and the same reach as Rose.
Mm-hmm.
She's not a smaller flyweight, which she almost always is, either.
Yeah, that is a good point. I do definitely think of her as being shorter than
Right?
Rose.
That's the thing. You expect Rose to come into these flyweight fights, and you're like, well, she's still going to be long and tall. And she just isn't really for this division. So, I think there are the makings of a really strongly planned performance for Tracy Cortez here, where she's dealing with like attritional damage. You want to just introduce low kicks over the course of one camp and you just hammer that. That would be a great idea. Mm-hmm. Like you said, that worked for Andrade. That is the kind of thing you can just focus on. Granted, she hasn't had a full camp, so maybe that diminishes that. Maybe she's also more aggressive like Hebush and with the wrestling, which did work for Hebush, especially as that fight wore on. Maybe she's a good athlete for flyweight, and Rose was a very good athlete, I think, for strawweight, who's now older. Maybe she can just out-wrestle her. Maybe she can get on top of her. Maybe she can grind her out, hit her with some short shots on the ground, and just try to keep Rose in that defensive mindset. The makings of a strong strategic performance are there for Tracy Cortez. But that Jasuda Vicious fight is the first and only time, as of yet, that I have seen something like that from Tracy Cortez. So I just don't know how much of a sea change that fight really was for her career.
Yeah. I think it's just like it's a big jump up, and it's the fact that she has to showcase basically another almost comparable jump up again in order to win this fight. Unless, Rose looks like shit.
Unless Rose looks
easily happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, as long as Rose shows up in some kind of form, it looks to me like a very, very tough style matchup. And she needs to either be, willing to work attritional damage, or she needs to have figured out her defense a bit better, or she just needs to, have like doubled down on being a potent and aggressive fighter. Again, that's something that occasionally happens. People just, they have a strong aggressive performance. They're like, wow, that really worked. And then like next time they come out and they're just even more aggressive. Again, that would work.
Sure.
Do I trust it to work? I don't.
Yeah.
I'd have to see it. One of those fights, again, like the other Scale one, by any misgivings, I'd just have to pick Rose Namajunas.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I even, because you're my friend, Phil, I even, emotionally, I side with you. But I'm going to pick Tracy Cortez.
Ooh.
Take a flyer. I just think it's possible. It's a vibe.
Yeah. Yeah. At some point, Rose will go from being a sort of sine wave of a head case who goes from being like great to terrible to great to terrible, and at some point she'll just be terrible.
Yeah.
And Cortez is on the way up.
She certainly is, yeah. It should be a good fight. Like I said, if how do you use the late stage of like a Rose Namajunas career to keep the flyweight division moving? And if you can't get that fight with Macy Barber, I think this is a more than adequate replacement that still does something for both fighters and for the division. So I like it, and I'm looking forward to it. I think it should be fun.
Agreed.
All right. Well, let's call segment 1 there then. And when we come back, we still haven't even decided the order we're going to do these, but a couple fights we want to mention, Drew Dober, Silva, Christian Rodriguez, Erosa. Maybe we should first hit Joshua Van, Charles Johnson, another big prospect test happening in the men's flyweight division this time. And maybe a couple other things going on as well. We'll talk about all of that, some of it. We will talk about something after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. For this segment, we're going to jump all the way down to the prelims. Joshua Van is taking on Charles Johnson. Of course, Van was scheduled to fight Tagir Ulanbekov just a few weeks ago, about midway through June. Ulanbekov missed weight, and I don't remember the full story, but I would like to say good for Joshua Van not taking that fight. Maybe Ulanbekov missed weight so much that he pulled out. I don't know the details again, but you're young, you're very impressive. You don't have to let your opponent cheat, even if you get 30% of their purse at this point in your career. No pressure. So he decided to wait, presumably stayed in shape. Presumably doesn't need that much specific preparation, being a young, confident man. And now here we are, 3 weeks later or so, taking on Charles Johnson, who I think you quite aptly described, Phil, as sort of a flyweight Bobby Green.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say another... Not a crossroads fight, per se, because I don't really have any expectation of Charles Johnson contending. Sorry, Charles. But a benchmark fight, I suppose, for the developing blue chipper in Joshua Van. An opponent who is...
Yeah,
go on.
Well, so one of the things I was going to say is that this also... Well, you're a brave man. You've picked this to be the segment 2. We've already done a segment on
women's
Joshua
flyweights.
Van's last fight, which turned out to be...
Oh, yes.
And yeah, it's entirely possible that Alex Perez might have passed whatever cursed jockstrap he had, or whatever it was, the cursed item that he had that made him incapable of getting fights booked, to Joshua Van. And there is a one, because he's 4 fights in a row now. Yeah,
there's been a lot of cancellations.
There's always got to be a flyweight who can never make their fights. We know that.
Yeah, they met back in the locker room. Some of Alex Perez's spittle went in Joshua Van's ear. Now he's infected with it.
Yep, used to be Uncle Creepy. Now it's Alex Perez. Is it Joshua Van now? Is this going to be end up being Charles Johnson against some other guy?
I will say
that's also sort of.
Let me just say that for all 4 of these,
what those bookings look like.
All 4 of these cancellations, it is the opponent withdrawing or the opponent missing weight in the case of the last one. So Van is staying healthy as far as we can tell, which is better than Perez or Uncle Creepy's situation, where they were just constantly. They had the other opponents having problems too, which added to the curse element, but they were both constantly getting injured.
Yeah.
So at least he's young enough that he's not a broken man.
Yes. You can see with Joshua Van is that he's had a little career progression through the cancelled fight.
Right.
Because he was going to fight Lucas Rocha, who...
is a guy
no one's heard of. Then he was going to fight Sumadeji, who people have heard of. Then he was going to fight Tatsuro Taira, who people are excited about. Then, going down a little bit, Tagir Ulanbekov. And then now we've got... So he's had, an entire, arc upwards and downwards throughout fights which have never happened.
Yeah.
And I think that is partially because the UFC is perhaps now getting wary about booking him in important fights. Again, not his fault, but
not at all.
Maybe they're superstitious too.
I would say all those fights except Lucas Rocha are of a type that are more or less appropriate for this point in Joshua Van's career. Like I would say if you compared Charles Johnson to any of them as like a in terms of his potential, what a win would do for him or wouldn't do for him, he's closest to like Sumo Dereji. He's a guy who's good, and people know that. It's not going to be super pleasant to fight him, but he's not. I just don't think Charles Johnson is championship material. He's one of those guys who might be a really good 5-round fighter, but he's not going to be able to get there. And then Tatsuro Taira, fellow top prospect, but because of that, underdeveloped enough that it makes sense as a winnable fight for Joshua Van, right? They've tried, I would say, 3 times in a row to put together a sensible fight for Joshua Van, and it just hasn't happened. But this looks like another solid option. Johnson is a guy who has never been stopped in a 20-odd fight career, though he does often get buzzed early in fights. He is a characteristic slow starter. But where Joshua Van is a bit of a slow starter himself, he's more of a Piotr Jan slow starter. You know? Mm-hmm. Throws the pressure at you. Here's a bunch of feints. Here's a bunch of looks. Show me what you got. Reveal the entirety of your hand now, because when I get comfortable, I'm going to use all that information and all this head of steam I've already built up to just crush you. Charles Johnson is not a style of fighter that many prospects in MMA have to deal with on their way up. He is a young veteran neutralizer, a guy who is, I would say, perhaps not even arguably, he is simply too comfortable, like not being in a fully winning position, and it's why he's lost a ton of close fights. But the flip side of that is he'll be in there in a fight where he's not winning, and he is still going to be cooking up solutions and like trying to stay on top of it. He's going to be engaged, coming up with new answers, constantly making little adjustments. Not an easy guy to look good against with a very one-note approach, basically. You're going to need some stages to a game plan against Charles Johnson, or you're going to have to meet his adjustments on the fly, because he is going to come up with them as the fight goes on. So I think arguably the most interesting, it could be the most instructive, regarding like what kind of fighter Joshua Van, what is his potential really, of all these fights. Because Charles Johnson just seems like a guy who is designed to test fighters, to make them show what do you have over 3 rounds if it's not easy the entire time.
Yeah.
But also, like, if you really want to beat me, you can do it.
He's a
yeah.
He's a test of adaptability and focus. As you said, they're sort of like slightly similar fighters in the way they sort of get into the fight more. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's close to a Bobby Green or a Jorge Masvidal or something. He's someone that's just going to give everyone a tough fight.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot to like about Charles Johnson. Like Joshua Van, he's a big body puncher. I like the way that, I compared him a bit to Bobby Green, but he's less. He's got more impact, despite obviously being much smaller. He tends to sit down on his shots more. Sort of fences a bit less than Bobby Green. He's a bit less like weird, but I do like his hand fighting, his wrist control into clinch strikes. He will do wrist control into like big swinging body punches. He's just like a cool, like fun action fighter. And again, it's one of those ones where it's not particularly difficult to call. One of these guys is simply more potent and younger and more athletic, and one of them just wins rounds more clearly. But yeah, it should be an absolute banger.
Yeah, and yeah, both sort of slow starters, but complementary styles. Fully expect Van to be the aggressor here, and Johnson to allow that for the most part, and do a more passive version, I guess, of what Van likes to do. Try to get Van to show him his hand, and catch his timing on the way in, and just constantly change position, maintain the distance, dart in and out. I don't know. Like I said, it's if Joshua Van, with his talent, was an experienced fighter, I'd be super confident in his ability to deal with Johnson, because Johnson's going to let him have the fight he wants. It's the fact that the fight might start out very well for him. Like, this would be the first time, right, that Joshua Van has had a fight that probably starts off really well and then just gets suddenly hard, like halfway through round 2. Where he hurts the opponent and they just recover, which Johnson does extraordinarily well. And then suddenly they're doing better in the next round than they did in the one where you hurt them before. Has Joshua Van ever dealt with that? I would say no.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm totally going to pick him for the reasons you laid out. I think he's just much more dynamic. I think between the two of them, Van could in some way be helped by his inexperience here, because he knows he should be aggressive to win fights. You know, you can know too much and get yourself to overthink against a guy like Charles Johnson. I think Azat Maksum did that in a close fight, which he ended up losing as Johnson sort of settled into it and Maksum sort of ran out of ideas. I don't think Joshua Van runs out of ideas ever. Not unless he is forcibly stopped from getting the pressure and the reactions he needs to work off of. But so long as you're going to allow him to walk forward and feint at you, he is going to have all the feedback he needs to create and exploit openings. Keep it simple. Should work for Joshua Van. But be prepared for this fight to get weirdly close and indecisive in round 3. And we will get to find out how well Joshua Van deals with a comeback artist, which Johnson definitely is.
Yeah. I think I will say I think round 2. I think round 3. I think just Van might just be overwhelming him a bit, just from sheer physicality and racked up damage. But yeah, Johnson is cool, and this should be great.
Yeah, I love a crafty fighter. He's a crafty fighter. So yeah, really solid booking for Joshua Van. I hope it happens. And even if it doesn't, I'm going to still keep trying to talk about Joshua Van, even if his fights keep falling through, because when you got a really solid looking prospect like that, you got to pay attention. All right, let's call it there then. Take one more break. When we come back, we are just going to try to scoop up all of the, I was going to say chaff. It's not chaff. The less finely ground flour that's littering the rest of this card. Drew Dober, Silva, maybe Gabriel Bonfim, Angelosa, Christian Rodriguez, Julian-Erosa. I really want to talk about Santiago Ponzinibbio, Muslim Salikov. A fight which I was 100% certain had been rebooked 8 times, and that is just not true. So really a quintessential fringe ranked welterweight kind of matchup there. And we'll talk about possibly all of that after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's just move on scattershot style through some of these other main card bookings. Drew Dober, Silva is on this card. As I said at the top of the show, this was meant to be Drew Dober versus Mike Davis. Mike Davis, who seems to fight once every year and a half. And you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about Mike Davis. And you really enjoy the fight. And you look at him and you're like, this guy's a prospect. And then you remember that he's like 32 and he's been fighting once every year and a half for a long time now. But a perfectly adequate mid-card action fight against anywhere, anytime Drew Dober. That fell through. And I mean, I think possibly just this week, because Silva fought Charles Jourdain 2 weeks ago. Silva must have stepped up and said, well, I didn't get hurt. Charles Jourdain was easy. Give me Drew Dober. Up a weight class, too. Didn't even consider that. Of course, he fought Jourdain down at featherweight, yeah. So, maybe not a...
That's sort of one of the necessities, I would guess.
I would assume so, yeah.
That kind of notice.
Yeah, he's not like a really imposing stature, physically, Silva, but he's beefy. I would struggle to...
He's a muscly boys.
Yeah. One of those...
This is a front runner for the Patrick Wyman Memorial Award.
It really is. Yeah. And so, another one. Mid-card action fight. Maybe not a super wise decision for Silva to step up after a huge win over Charles Jourdain, up a weight class, but maybe it'll pay off for him down the road. You never know with the unscrupulous UFC. But yeah, what do you think?
You know what? I might be taking Silva for this one.
Really?
I am not sure. There's the one thing about Drew Dober is that there used to be one way to reliably beat Drew Dober, which was to out-wrestle him. And that would work for pretty much everyone who wanted to do it, and that was fine. But I am concerned now that maybe... I feel like this was Brad Riddell, surprisingly enough. I feel like Brad Riddell might have cracked Drew Dober's chin.
Yeah.
Like, admittedly, went on to have, like, a bunch of mostly impressive KO wins and, like, best streak of his career kind of thing. A streak of wins in which he got hurt badly every single time.
Every time.
In ways which we had literally never seen in his career until that Riddell fight, where Riddell just started dropping bombs on him.
Yep.
Like, I do feel like it is one of those ones where, like, he didn't get KO'd in the fight itself, but the damage he accrued in it has never left him.
That is really true, actually. I don't think I ever pinpointed that fight as a turning point, as you just have, but it really was. You look back, Drew Dober had a very long career in which I cannot recall him even getting hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Ever. And then, yeah, Brad Riddell comes out, starts hot, hurts Brad Riddell, can't put him away. He starts to slow down, and Riddell just starts nailing him on the counter and hurting him. And then suddenly, it's every single fight. He got instantly dropped by Terrence McKinney, got dropped early by Rafael Alves. Bobby Green didn't drop him, but was cracking him really, really hard with visible effect. Got knocked out by Matt Frevola. And then he didn't get hurt at all by Moicano, did he?
I don't think so.
He just got out.
I thought that was mostly like...
He got out-wrestled.
Yeah. Mostly just him getting out-wrestled for entire rounds.
And then momentarily out wrestling Moicano, and then trying to do it again.
Yep.
But he's been getting hurt almost every fight since Riddell. You're right.
Yep. And there's a dynamism ceiling for whether you can do that or not, obviously.
Clearly, yeah.
Or Ricky Glenn is not hitting that dynamism ceiling.
Right.
In a very easily predictable fight. But is John Silva breaking that dynamism ceiling even as, a featherweight?
Gut says yes.
He is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to hurt Drew Dober pretty badly. Again, the question is, is he going to hurt him badly? Is that going to translate into, a knockout win?
Right.
That seems like a tough thing to call for confidence.
I mean, the really big question for me here is what happens when Jean Silva finds out that he can't pressure Drew Dober, or will he be able to? Because everybody else he's fought, including Charles Jourdain, have been sort of intimidated by Jean Silva.
That is also a good indicator of how potent.
Yeah.
Silva is in and of himself, because Charles Jourdain is not a easily scarable man.
No. But you can't even look at that fight with Jourdain and be super carried away with enthusiasm for the brilliance of Silva's tactics, Wow, look at these guys. It's a lot of him just I'm going to walk forward. Oh, you're going to go back when I do that? Great. I'm going to walk forward some more. Oh, your back's against the fence. I'm going to do some crazy feinting and then throw something. And even if it barely touches you, you're going to feel it, and it's going to allow me to pressure more. Maybe it's going to cause you to go crazy and overextend. That's how Jourdain first got dropped by Silva. He tried to back him off, lunged in, and ran into a check hook. But really, it's a very crude approach from Jean Silva, but once again, sometimes keeping it simple is the way to handle a challenging opponent. You're big and strong and you hit hard. Just do that. The thing is I don't think Drew Dober's going to let him pressure. I don't think Drew Dober has let anyone pressure for years now, many years. And I have no idea. I have to assume Jean Silva does not have good defense, does not have great evasive footwork. Is not a particularly good counterpuncher outside of that first layer where he just has the speed and the timing to catch you coming in. If he is put under sustained pressure from Drew Dober, who's going to be hitting his body, who's going to be drawing shots out of him and re-countering, who's going to be throwing in combination, does that wilt Jean Silva? I think it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
If not likely.
He's simply never been in those kind of firefights before.
And a bigger man doing it, too. Who just maybe doesn't feel like he has to be intimidated by Jean Silva.
So yeah, I think I'm going to pick Jean Silva. It's a bit of a flyer. I don't think, again, he hasn't really beaten people who would make you think he can defeat one of the most reliable action fighters upper weight class. Drew Dober's still, he was getting hurt, but he's still only been finished the once, at least by strikes. It's the fact that you sort of have to be picking him to finish Drew Dober if you're confidently asking him to win that fight, which is a task. So I am picking him, but it is a bit of a flyer.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with Drew Dober, I think. I will ride with the experience here and the depth. I just haven't. It could be there. I kind of doubt it. One way or the other, I haven't seen it yet from Jean Silva. And I just don't like the I don't like the prospects for him if Drew Dober manages to corral him and pressure him and make him think defensively and reactively. If he gets any kind of initiative at all. I think that could. I mean, here's the thing: if you're gonna knock out Charles Jourdain, which again, let's not understate that, is a very impressive thing to do. If you're gonna knock out Charles Jourdain, it's gonna be in a fight where you like get to him early, and do not let him settle in and come up with adjustments, because that's something Jourdain is innately good at, and is frequently a slow starter who finishes really strong. John Silva dropped him in the first round and then finished him early in the second. All single shots.
Also, I would like to note that John Silva's nickname is Lord Assassin, which I think is like just goes to show how much above he is all the other like hitmans and assassins in the world.
Yeah.
He's the Lord Assassin.
Lord Assassin.
And nothing speaks more to his like Team Geek bona fides than having that, which I'm sure is the name of his D&D character or something.
Yeah. Normally when we talk about anything German in like Brazil or any other South American country, we're making jokes about, all the Nazis who fled there and whatnot. This is the first time a Brazilian has really reminded me of the way that Germans use English words.
Yeah.
Not quite sure how they fit together. Lord Assassin makes sense, but no American or Englishman would come up with that as their nickname. It's very corny. All right. I mean, guaranteed to be a fun fight. We can say that much.
Oh, yes.
Both of these dudes do not ever disappoint. All right. Let's talk now about a little, a dark horse favorite of mine, I suppose. Christian Rodriguez versus Julian Erosa is, second up on the main card here. Huge experience gap between these two fighters. And yet I do not think it will look like a fight with a massive experience gap. That is, in fact, why I like Christian Rodriguez so much. I first started looking at him, of course, when he was booked to fight Raul Rosas Jr., and that looked like a fight with a massive experience gap, even though he only had like 2 more fights than Rosas. Clearly, this was a guy who was a student of the game, who was capable of being technically proficient in every area he needed to be to stick to a really solid strategy and just take Raul Rosas Jr. methodically out of the fight. I saw that. I watched him just stuff the takedowns, win the scrambles on the ground, and just suffocate and slowly squeeze the life out of Rosas, and I thought, this is one of my guys. That was a really solid, mature performance. And I think he has followed up really well on those. I thought we saw more of the boxing side of his skill set when he took on Cameron Simon. And we got to see, the excellent jab, the counterpunching, great footwork, like just a positionally solid striker. And then we saw him in a super tough test, was that up at lightweight? No, featherweight. His first one back up at featherweight against super wrestling prospect Isaac Dolgarian, where he was just completely incapable of matching Dolgarian's physicality and aggression and wrestling skill. All these things combined, but he stayed perfectly calm and kept solving one little problem at a time. And then Dolgarian started to get tired, and suddenly Rodriguez just started winning the fight. Again, a super mature performance from a guy with only 11, 12 bouts under his belt. So I think we're essentially looking at a weird on paper, but a veteran versus veteran fight in feel. And I'm all about that. Mm-hmm. So what do you make of the matchup with Erosa?
Yeah, he's in trouble. Rodriguez.
Think so?
Yeah. I think so. I couldn't be sure, but like, who are the kind of people that give Julian-Erosa trouble?
People who immediately knock him out.
Yes, that is it. That's the only people.
And there have been a lot of them.
How does Christian?
But yeah, usually they have to knock him out right away.
Yes, he is the Gerald Meerschaert of his division, where you can turn his lights out instantly, and if you don't do that, you're in for just a really, really horrible time. And yeah, I think for me, like, the main question is how. Well, I mean, like, Rodriguez is like, he's consistent, he's tough, but like, there's other fighters who are like quite consistent and tough. Like, for example, Charles Jourdain, who I also think are like a good deal more potent than Rodriguez. And Erosa was still able to like force Jourdain out of the fight and eventually, finish him. I just think he's just really tough to fight against unless you have like significant firepower. And I'm just not sure if I see a way that like Rodriguez is going to out-scrap Julian-Erosa.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Erosa will...
Especially, like, given the fact that, like, Julian-Erosa is, huge.
He is big, yeah. What actually is the size difference here? Erosa comes in at 6'1", 74.5-inch wingspan, compared to Rodriguez at 5'7", with a 71-inch wingspan.
Ugh.
That is a...
He's not like a bricked-up 5'7". This is going to look like people from two very different weight classes fighting each other.
Yeah. Rodriguez is, I mean, he's only fighting at featherweight. I think did he miss weight in that Simon fight?
Yeah, I think maybe he did.
Yeah, he did. So he had to go up. Or at least, I'm not sure if he was forced. He decided to go up because he really struggled with the weight cut. He's just one of those little guys who's maybe very compact, or perhaps just being a skill-based fighter more than a physical one, feels that it's better not to spend his entire camp trying to lose as much weight as possible, and his time is better spent focusing on refining his game. Which I can appreciate and respect, of course. Like Nathaniel Wood.
Yep.
Yeah, there is one fight I would point to, though. I mean, I more or less agree with you. I think Erosa is going to get everybody into a scrap with him. I would say most of the people he beats in those scraps, as much as there is a really like stark type that beats Erosa, there's kind of a type that he beats. It's a lot of people who can't grapple with him. This is often that was Charles Jourdain's issue. When the pressure started to get to him, the reason it works as well as it does is because you do not have a way to change the pace of the fight or gain control anywhere except the striking. And so you just get overwhelmed. And that's not a problem for Rodriguez. I don't think. I mean, granted, going in there grappling with a big, much bigger, very dangerous submission artist. But I think Rodriguez is you saw that hugely physically outmatched against Isaac Dolgarian, and he was still in there wrestling like a beast. And like non-stop scrambling, just super methodical. Oh, you've taken me down. I'm just going to immediately not accept the position. I'm stuffing the head. I'm creating a frame. I'm getting my hips out. He's just a step-by-step solid wrestler and grappler. So that strikes me as an avenue that he could keep him from getting just trapped in the kind of scrap Erosa wants to have. The other fight that comes to mind, though, which is the one knockout loss which does not fit the type, is Erosa versus Julio Arce. A smaller, not particularly potent technician striker. And it doesn't fit the type because Erosa hasn't fought a lot of them. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
I guess Hakeem Dawodu is kind of in that camp. He's a bit of a head case.
Yeah, but he's still sharp and powerful.
Yeah, true. But I do wonder about that fight that Rodriguez had with Simon, where it was largely contested on the feet, and he was largely just staying at the right distance and running Simon into his jabs and his counter right hands, pressuring when he needed to pressure, but also being very comfortable moving back to keep the space or just maintaining it in the middle of the cage. And I don't know. Obviously, I have a hard-on for Christian Rodriguez, so my judgment for this fight is not going to be super clear-eyed. But I don't see it as that terrible a matchup for Rodriguez. I think there's just a lot of ways for us. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, Erosa can be unreliable enough that he's. I mean, we talked about sort of the durability, limit when we were talking about, Oba, right?
Yeah.
It's obviously not that high for Julian Erosa. Like, you don't have to hit that hard because Julio Arce does not hit that hard. I mean, admittedly, he kicks him upside the head rather than, punching him, but still, he's not what you think of as being, a devastating dynamic striker. But, Rodriguez doesn't qualify.
No.
He's just never shown any dynamism in any of his fights. But, so...
He's a perfectly sharp and accurate striker, but yeah, he's not. I mean, you say that. The thing is, the guys who have... I guess Caceres also knocked Erosa out. Otherwise, all the guys who have knocked him out early have been notably hard punchers.
Yeah.
Devontae Smith, Teruto Ishihara, Seungwoo Choi, Fernando Padilla. These are punchers.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Artem Lobov.
Oh, yeah. This is the thing. There's enough outliers in there. You're telling me if Artem Lobov can knock Erosa out in round one, Christian Rodriguez can't do it?
Yes, I'm telling you that. I'm saying Christian Rodriguez is a lesser puncher. And also that Julian Erosa will not be on tough when this happens.
Yes, true, yeah.
But yeah, that core factor in that he's just a hittable dude.
Yeah.
And that he doesn't actually have massive amounts of pop himself probably means that it's going to be a gritty fight.
Yeah.
And yeah, Rodriguez should be able to get some grappling exchanges on him. I mean, I've always said how much of a horrendous robbery the Paddy Pimblett fight was. But Erosa isn't ungrappleable.
No.
Doesn't have a cast iron takedown defense.
No, he's mostly the front headlock threat when you try to take him down. And if you can deal with that, you can get him down.
So it should be competitive. But yeah, again, another one where I just cannot not pick Julian Erosa because it's too much like what he loves to do. He's just going to have a huge size advantage and he's going to be fighting someone who just probably can't hurt him. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to pick Christian Rodriguez because I want him to win. That
always works well.
It seems as good a reason as any, really, at the end of the day. Yeah, I really like the matchup. I mean, I totally get what you're saying. I think Erosa should be favored, as a really proven quantity and a fighter who has just never really lost, to the kinds of matchups that Rodriguez has won. But, it's undeniable that Rodriguez is really solid and will make every fighter at pretty much every level work really, really hard to beat him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sounds like a guaranteed compelling fight to me.
Yep. There's a bunch of them on this card.
It really is. Like I said, these have all been a nice salad bar of interesting matchups. With a pretty solid main event. I don't really have any complaints about this fight night card. I like it.
Doesn't have like any super recognizable fighters for people, but it's just a good card. Should be a good time.
Yeah, that's what a fight night card should look like. That also makes sense. It's happening in Denver, not at the Apex. That explains it. That's why it seems like a real card. Okay. So hopefully we get some fun stuff to talk about from that we will be back to discuss with you next week. What else is coming up on the horizon, at the very least, in the easily checkable world of UFC cards? July 20th, we have another women's main event, Amanda Lemos versus Virna Jandiroba. Pretty solid fight there. That card also features Brad Tavares, Jin Young Park. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Doo-Ha Choi? He's alive?
The Korean super elder.
The Korean super retiree is fighting Bill Algeo on that card. Well, I'll say this. It's an Apex card, but as it is right now, it could be worse. So hopefully it gets a little better by the time we get to it next week. If not, we should have a lot of interesting results from the Namajunas-Cortez card, provided it doesn't continue to get slammed by the injury gods when we talk to you next week. Until then, I will urge you to check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. If you haven't heard it already, we did basically an entire episode of Heavy Hands talking about that Robert Whittaker Ikram Alaskarov card. And coming up very soon will be the return of Heavy Henka, my sumo recap series on the Heavy Hands Patreon with the wonderful and intelligent Miguel Class. And our plan for this next tournament is actually to do 2 episodes, one halfway through, and then another one at the end. Because sumo has a way of developing storylines in surprising ways over the course of one of these 15-day tournaments. So that will also be on the Heavy Hands Patreon this month. I am, of course, looking forward to more sumo. And I hope you are as well. And yeah, find us on Twitter, EvilGuard Jackson, that's Phil, Boxing Bush, that's me, the Patreon, facepunching.substack.com. There's too many plugs now. I don't know. It's Heavy Hands.